The morning after her wedding, Clara found a signet ring worth more than her father's entire estate hidden beneath her husband's ragged pillow. Her hands trembled as she held the golden band up to the weak sunlight filtering through the cracked window of their tiny cottage. The crest was unmistakable, two ravens perched on a crown, the symbol of House Ravencrest, the most powerful noble family in the kingdom. The same family that had mysteriously vanished 15 years ago, leaving behind only whispers and speculation. But that was impossible. She had married Thomas, a beggar who slept in doorways and survived on scraps tossed from tavern windows. She had seen him herself, day after day in the market square, his clothes threadbare and his face gaunt from hunger, the very man now sleeping peacefully beside her, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of someone who had finally found rest. Clara's heart pounded as fragments of the previous day replayed in her mind. The wedding had been hastily arranged, her stepmother Agatha insisting it happen within the week, claiming they couldn't afford to feed Clara any longer. "Marry him or find yourself on the streets," Agatha had hissed. "At least this way you'll be someone else's burden." The ceremony had been a mockery of romance. No flowers, no feast, no celebration. Just a handful of witnesses in the village chapel and a priest who seemed eager to finish quickly. Thomas had stood beside her, his head bowed respectfully, speaking his vows in a voice so soft she could barely hear him. When the priest announced they could kiss, Thomas had simply inclined his head, a gesture that had seemed oddly formal at the time. Now, studying the ring more closely, Clara noticed something else. Engraved on the inner band were the words, "Marcus Aldwin Ravencrest, heir to the Northern Throne." Marcus, not Thomas. Her mind raced back to the stories she'd heard as a child, the Ravencrest heir who had disappeared the night his family was murdered by political rivals. Some said he was dead, killed along with his parents and siblings. Others whispered he had escaped, fled to the wilderness to survive in exile. But a beggar in the market square, living on charity and sleeping rough. Clara glanced at her sleeping husband, Marcus, and noticed things she had missed before. His hands, though dirty, were not calloused like those of a laborer. His teeth, though yellowed from poor diet, were straight and well-formed. His speech, when he did speak, carried the careful diction of someone educated. Even his posture, now that she thought about it, held a dignity that seemed at odds with his circumstances. The sound of footsteps outside made her jump. She quickly slipped the ring back under the pillow and moved to the small window. Her stepmother Agatha stood in the cottage garden, but she wasn't alone. 3 men in dark cloaks flanked her, their faces hidden beneath deep hoods. "Are you certain he suspects nothing?" one of the men asked in a low voice. "Positive," Agatha replied, counting coins that glinted in her palm. "The girl knows nothing either. She thinks she's married some pathetic beggar. They'll both be easy to dispose of once you've confirmed his identity." Clara's blood turned to ice. This had all been a trap. Agatha hadn't forced her into marriage out of cruelty, she had been bait. But bait for what? And how had Agatha known who Thomas really was? Behind her, she heard stirring from the bed. Marcus, she couldn't think of him as Thomas anymore, was beginning to wake. She turned to see his eyes flutter open, and for a moment, unguarded by sleep, she saw something there she had never noticed before. Intelligence, wariness, and a deep, bone-deep sadness that spoke of tremendous loss. "Clara?" His voice was gentle, concerned. "You're awake early." She wanted to confront him, to demand answers about the ring, about his identity, about why her stepmother was plotting with mysterious men outside their window. But something in his expression stopped her. This was a man who had been running, hiding, surviving by his wits for 15 years. One wrong move could send him fleeing again, and she might never learn the truth. Instead, she forced a smile. "I couldn't sleep. Too much excitement from yesterday, I suppose." Marcus sat up, and she noticed how he automatically scanned the room, checking the exits, listening for sounds outside, the habits of someone who had lived in constant danger. "Clara, he said slowly. There's something I need to tell you, about who I really am. Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both of them froze. Thomas, Agatha's voice called out sweetly. I've brought some friends to meet your new bride. Open up, dear boy. Marcus's face went pale. In that instant, Clara saw him transform from the meek beggar she thought she knew into someone else entirely. He moved with sudden purpose, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the back of the cottage. We need to leave now, he whispered urgently. I'll explain everything, but first we have to get out of here. The knocking became more insistent. Thomas, I know you're in there. Clara found herself faced with an impossible choice. She could open the door, confront her stepmother, and demand answers. She could stay and face whatever danger was approaching. Or she could trust this man, this stranger who had somehow become her husband, and flee into the unknown. Marcus had reached the cottage's back door and was quietly working the latch. He looked back at her, his eyes pleading. Clara, please, I know you have no reason to trust me, but if we stay, we're both dead. The front door shook under heavy blows. The men outside were losing patience. Why should I trust you? Clara whispered. You've been lying to me. About everything. Because, Marcus said, meeting her eyes with startling intensity, I've spent 15 years running from killers, and marrying you was the first thing that's made me want to stop running. I won't let them hurt you because of me. Something in his voice, raw honesty mixed with desperation, made her decision for her. She grabbed her cloak and a small bag of her few possessions. Where do we go? She asked. Relief flooded his features. North, to the mountains. I have allies there. They slipped out the back door just as the front door splintered open. Clara heard Agatha's sharp intake of breath and angry voices as the men discovered the empty cottage. They had perhaps a minute's head start. Marcus led her through the forest behind their cottage, moving with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had planned this escape route long ago. As they ran, Clara's mind whirled with questions. Who was he really? What had happened to his family? Why had he chosen to marry her of all people? But one question burned brightest. If Marcus was truly the lost heir of House Ravencrest, what did that make her? After an hour of hard travel, they stopped beside a small stream to rest and drink. Clara finally found the courage to speak. I found the ring, she said simply. Marcus went very still. What ring? The signet ring, under your pillow. Marcus Aldwin Ravencrest, heir to the Northern Throne. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he pulled the ring from his pocket and held it in his palm. I was going to tell you, he said quietly. I was going to tell you everything, but I needed to be sure you were safe first. Tell me now, Clara said. All of it. Marcus closed his eyes, as if gathering strength to revisit old pain. 15 years ago, my family was betrayed by our closest advisor. He opened our gates to assassins in the night. I was 16, young and stupid, and I happened to be out of the castle visiting a girl in the village. His mouth twisted in bitter irony. My selfishness saved my life while my parents, my sister, my younger brother, all of them died in their beds. Clara's heart ached for the pain in his voice. The advisor claimed the throne for himself, but he knew I was still alive. He spent 15 years hunting me, using every resource of the crown to track me down. So I became Thomas the Beggar. I learned to disappear, to become invisible, to survive on scraps and kindness. But why marry me? Clara asked. Why risk exposure? Marcus looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Because your stepmother approached me 3 months ago. She knew who I was, somehow she had figured it out. She offered me a bargain, marry her stepdaughter, and she would keep my secret and help me disappear permanently. Clara felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. She knew? All along. But I think she was lying, Marcus continued quickly. I think she was working with them, with the people hunting me. I think marrying you was meant to trap me, to keep me in one place long enough for them to strike. Then why did you do it? Marcus was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was tired of running. And because when I saw you in the market that first day, really saw you. Not just glanced as I hurried past, I thought perhaps there might be something worth stopping for. Clara's cheeks warmed despite their dangerous circumstances. You barely knew me. I knew enough, Marcus said, meeting her eyes. I knew you gave half your bread to the stray cats behind the bakery. I knew you stood up to the merchant who was cheating the widow Thompson. I knew you smiled at me at Thomas the Beggar when everyone else looked through me as if I didn't exist. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 15 years of secrets settling between them. So what happens now? Clara asked. Do we keep running forever? Marcus fingered the signet ring. There's another option, but it's dangerous, and it would mean giving up any chance of a quiet life. What option? We go north, to the Ravenhold Mountains. Some of my family's most loyal knights escaped the massacre and have been waiting there all these years. If I can reach them, if I can prove my identity. He paused. I could reclaim my throne, but it would mean war. Clara stared at him. In the space of a single morning, she had gone from being a poor girl married to a beggar to being the wife of a lost prince, contemplating civil war. And if we don't? She asked. We run until they catch us, and they will catch us eventually. Clara thought of her stepmother's betrayal, of the men in dark cloaks, of the trap that had been laid around her marriage. She thought of the life she would be leaving behind, a life of servitude and scorn, where her worth was measured only by how little burden she placed on others. Then she looked at Marcus, this man who had survived 15 years of exile and danger, who had learned to become invisible but had chosen to become visible for her. How far to these mountains? She asked. Hope flickered in his eyes. 3 days hard travel, maybe 4. Then we'd better get moving, Clara said, standing and shouldering her pack. Your Majesty. Marcus winced. Please don't call me that, not yet. Maybe not ever, if this all goes wrong. Then what should I call you? Clara asked. Thomas? Marcus? My lord husband? A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. How about just Marcus, at least until we figure out what comes next? Marcus it is, Clara agreed. Now let's go start a revolution. As they resumed their journey north, Clara couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns her life had taken. Yesterday morning she had been a reluctant bride facing a loveless marriage to a beggar. Now she was a refugee princess, fleeing assassins with her exiled king husband, planning to reclaim a stolen throne. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. But as Marcus took her hand to help her across a fallen log, and she saw the determination replacing the despair in his eyes, she realized it might just be the life she had been waiting for without knowing it. The adventure was just beginning. As we dive deeper, let us know in the comment where you're watching from. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you will never miss our next story.